The dragon has now burnt down the village. There's nothing more to be done than to let it burn, because at this point, the market forces are already irreversible. So what we need to do right now is let it burn. There's no more time left for a correction to happen.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Hope It Helps, and I have a very special guest with me today, Miss Lee Safar. Lee, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Khaled. I'm very excited about being
I'm
here.
so excited. You have no idea. Guys, you know me. If you've known me, if you've been watching the podcast for a while, you know I'm fucking obsessed with coffee, and I love speaking to experts. And just to give you guys some context, I've been following Lee's podcast, for a while over the years, and I really love the approach you take and how you go super deep into so many different areas. Now, look at me. I'm a coffee drinker. That's full stop. I just know what I like, and that's it. I don't really know the ins and outs of the industry, the issues that are part of it. Over time, through conversations I've had on the podcast, I've started to get some inklings, but I've yet to come across someone who just fucking goes at it like you do, which I really respect and I appreciate.
Thank you.
So for today, we're going to be talking about coffee, obviously, but we're going to be diving into a lot of different things about, talking about the future of coffee, the corruption in the industry, and your journey in this whole coffee space, to start with. But before we get into everything, Lee, why don't you give all of us a little bit of background about yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks again for having me. This is a real treat. I don't normally go on other people's podcasts.
I know, I'm honored. I'm so lucky.
So thank you for the invitation. I have been in the coffee industry for 20 years. That wasn't what I expected. I am a genetic scientist. I didn't enjoy being in a lab. So I then went into the corporate world, and I was a senior business analyst and project manager at IBM for about almost a decade. Didn't like the corporate environment, got out of that and thought, I want to do something I'm passionate about. Much to a lot of people's, they didn't like it because, education, we're Arabs,
Sure.
right? So to go from genetic scientist to corporate climber to, I think I want to be a singer and a barista. Can you imagine our Arab fathers?
I lived it, trust me, I know. I grew up in one. I know. It was either doctor, engineer, lawyer, or you're shit. But, with time, they kind of got with got on board.
So that didn't go down so well at all. Took them a long time to accept it. And I could see that at the time, there was this kind of thing emerging in the coffee world. I knew that there was this kind of intersection happening between the way that the world was drinking like Lavazza and Illy and that kind of commercial grade coffee, and this more artisan thing that was going on. And I could see that was something that resonated with me. And I quit my corporate job and thought, I'm going to go and be an internationally famous singer. But in the meantime, I'm going to go and do coffee as well because I love that. So I did the music thing and got enough attention with that, and then realized this is not the life that I want to be living. I don't, integrity is my number one value. And I remember being invited to a Diddy party and saying no, and realizing that I'm the one who people are looking at weird because I'm saying no.
Well, that paid off big time now.
And now, 20 years later, I'm looking at that thinking, I tell a lot of the kids that I mentor, the things you say no to are going to define your journey as much as the things that you say yes to. But often it won't be for decades that you understand that that's the case.
Yeah.
So then I went into coffee, and when I started working in coffee, I couldn't believe we got paid to do it.
Really? Okay.
Oh my God. I thought I get to drink coffee and socialize all day. Coming from the corporate world where I didn't enjoy it at all. And it felt like a very hostile environment. Then we get to the end of my first shift, and the person I was working with, Marco, he said, okay, go home. I went, and what do I do when I go home? He went, whatever the fuck you want. I went, what do you mean? I don't have anything to do at home? And he went, go fucking home. Go do music. Play on your keyboard for all I care. I don't care. Just don't be here.
Yeah.
And this whole idea that doing a job that's contained within the time that you're at work was a completely foreign concept to me.
Of course, especially with that background.
Yeah. So then I was a barista for the next 15 years and loved it. I traveled the world doing it, did it in a lot of different countries. And the whole time I knew I was going to be a business owner. But I knew I wasn't going to own cafes or roasteries.
Okay.
I loved being a barista. And I knew if I own a cafe, celebrities all over the world have tried to throw money at me to say, let's go partners. Some of the biggest celebrities in the world. I'm not interested. I like being a barista in a cafe. And if I'm going to be an owner of a cafe, I'm never going to get to be a barista.
That's true.
So, and this, now I'm a consultant. I've got the biggest coffee industry podcast in the world. It's the most influential coffee industry podcast in the world. And the consulting that we do is at all levels of the supply chain and at all levels of business ownership. We're more business advisors than we are consultants. And so what comes with that is helping people understand, should I be doing this? Shouldn't I be doing this? What is the path ahead of me? And that's why we're called Map It Forward. Map It Forward is about, if I understand what's ahead of me, I can at least manage my expectations of what the journey is. And not enough people who get into coffee understand the path that's ahead of them.
I think you're spot on with that.
And that's small business ownership in general. It just so happens to be that everyone with a fucking hand grinder and a V60 thinks that they make the best coffee in the world, and that means that they should open a business. Right?
I'm just reflecting on myself because I'm like, my V60 is the best. It's the fucking best. But again, it's for me.
Well, and opening a coffee business is about being in business. It's not about the coffee, really.
I think a lot of people forget that.
You should be employing people who can execute the coffee. Your role is to understand the business of coffee. And this is why we've gotten into such a bad situation of where we're at in the coffee industry. And I guess we'll talk more about that as we go through the conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for that timeline. So I knew about bits and pieces of it from my research, but I didn't know the corporate background. I had no idea you were a barista for 15 years before you, I guess, started getting into like coffee as more on the business side. So I know you have Elixir, right? Specialty coffee. So I want to, before we dive into like the heavy coffee stuff, I want to take a step back for a second. So I wanted to start because from what I saw, I'm like, okay, once upon a time, Lee clearly wanted to be a singer. Yeah. And you had Red Feather Records. I actually listened to a couple of the songs you did. So I listened to Shackles, Burning Feathers. And I was like, when I was hearing the music, I'm like, this back at that time would have been a banger. That was the music that was going on, that kind of vibe with like a voice, like yours. But even just from our first conversation and listening to your background, I could tell straight off the bat that you're a person that likes to call out the bullshit in the world. Mm-hmm. And which makes perfect sense why you hated corporate and you hated, the corporate side of, your experience, because that is not an arena that you can do that. No. And I resonate with that a lot because that's how I felt when I was in the corporate world. They would always tell you, hey, we want be yourself within this box. And the politics and, just you have to, the VP is coming, you have to like bow down to him. And I was like, why? It's just a guy, an older guy that's done more shit than I have. That's it. So I really resonate with that, and I think that's the reason I was so excited to also have you on the show. But I want to understand from you, where does that mindset come from? Was there an experience, I guess, in your life where it was like a wake up call? You're like, I'm done with this. I'm going to start calling out bullshit on everything.
I would love to say that, I saw a moment in where there was an injustice and I just had to stand up for it at university. No, I'm an identical twin.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. No, that's awesome. What a surprise.
And when you walk through the world as an identical twin, it's a different experience. That it is a special experience that most people don't get to experience. And I'm also born into an Arab family with a very Arab father. And anyone who has an Arab father understands that there's cultural things that when you're first generation, when you're born the first generation in a Western country to an Arab father, there's going to be some misalignments. And I was born a curious soul. And for an Arab father, they don't see that as she's curious, I want to nurture that. They see that she's being a disrespectful little bitch and I need to knock that out of her.
Yeah.
And it did knock it out of me. In fact, I kept trying to fix that part of myself. And I started to realize that I am just inherently that way, that it is a deep ingrained value in me that integrity is important. Not because I think I'm better than anybody else or that I want to rise above. It's not that. I have a disgust mechanism that's triggered when I can smell your bullshit.
Yeah.
And I don't want to smell anyone's bullshit. And that means that when I do see that bullshit happening, I either have to make the decision of walking away or calling it out. And it means that people who like to fuck other people over find people like me very hard. We act as a kind of mirror that people don't want to look in. But for people who are just good people and who naturally resonate with having integrity, we're the right kind of people to be around. We've got nothing to hide. We're open to admitting when we're wrong. We want to learn from everybody else. We're generally very curious about anything. And we're open to very many experiences. But that is very intimidating to a lot of people.
It's interesting that and just as you were saying, earlier that that you haven't been on many podcasts because hosts are worried you'd do a better job or, whatever the case might be. It's interesting that I can understand why those kind of people you're like the kryptonite to that, because a lot of people, I'm not talking about me, but in general, I think a lot of us in certain situations might be like, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut here. I'm not going to say anything. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to ruffle some feathers. I don't want to piss this guy off. So it's rare. It's harder to find people like you who will actually say it, which is something that I really respect, because I think people like you or who call out bullshit like that or think of things in a different way are the people I'm drawn to, because they're the people I'm like, oh, finally someone has said something, and and I can be open and honest here. I try to do that. I don't always succeed. And there's definitely times that I reflect and I'm like, fuck man, I really want to say something and I didn't. But I think it's like a muscle too that
Courage is a muscle.
Like you have to build, right? Yeah.
Courage is a muscle.
Yeah.
And that muscle needs to be taught to you by other people who've already built the muscles.
Interesting. Can you dive a little bit deeper into that?
When you lie with dogs, they're completely unaware of the courage muscle. When you lie with people or you walk the world with people who are aware of what's required to keep the courage muscle strengthened, because they know what comes with being courageous. Their courage inspires you to keep building your muscles. And because of that, people like us have to be very, very careful about who we surround ourselves with.
But I would argue that because you operate the way you do, I would imagine it would be difficult to have the wrong people around you.
It's not difficult. I just walk away.
There you go.
It's difficult for them because they feel like they've been judged. But what they don't like, and they usually engage me with it. And what I say to them is, it's not about you, man. I am responsible for my own mental health. I am responsible for my own happiness and my own safety. Being around you doesn't fulfill any of those things. And I'm one of those people who sticks around far too long. I give you every fucking chance under the sun to demonstrate to me that I'm the one who's seeing this wrong.
I resonate with that so much, because there's times that I might meet someone, and this happens to all of us. I might meet someone, in my head I'm like, fuck that guy. He's done nothing to me, but fuck that guy.
Yeah.
All right? And then rarely, sometimes I'm wrong, rarely down the line they'll do something and I'll sit and I'll be like at home, be like, oh, I'm a fucking asshole, man. Like he seems like a good guy. Maybe he's just having a bad day. I don't know what's going on. But more often than not, that first impression, and I've spoken about this with other guests on the podcast, that first impression seems to carry through over time.
Where I fail is that because I register really, really high in empathy, I see people's nature before I see their nurture.
Okay.
Which means I believe that people are inherently, they tend towards kindness. They tend towards being good people and compassionate people. That's their nature. But their nurture, whether that was nurture from their family or that was nurture at high school or that was nurture in their workplace, it fucks with them. It fucks with their head. It fucks with their emotional stability. It fucks with their anxiety. It fucks with everything. And because I see somebody's nature before I see their nurture, I'm learning, and this is a very intense thing that I'm working on at the moment, is how do I see somebody's nature but bring their nurture into the equation much sooner than I currently am.
To look at the whole picture rather than just the nature isolated.
Because that's where I get burnt.
Okay.
Is like I keep waiting for them to live up to their nature, when in fact they're trying to tell me the whole time, hey bitch, this is my nurture and I'm going to fuck you up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you should believe me.
Yeah.
Right?
No, absolutely.
And if that's the failing, that's the failing. It's the position of growth that needs to come. But we've all got growth that we need to do. And we've all got, So courage is one thing. But learning when to have boundaries is really, really important.
No, 100%. I relate to what you're talking about a lot, because I've had over the years many deep conversations with my father about this. And he always told me, you remind me of him in a way, in the sense that he's like, my biggest mistake that I've made in my career was I gave too many people the benefit of the doubt.
100%.
And kind of like what you said, 100%. But then I got screwed over. But at the same time, and I think this is, I can imagine this is why you might struggle with it as well. He's like, but that's me, that's who I am, and although I got screwed over, he tells me, I don't think I would change who I am. But of course, kind of like what you're talking about, there are maybe ways to definitely improve in that arena. Yeah. And
it's just about learning. It took me a long time to learn how to keep my circle tight, how to choose the right people, how to stop blaming myself when other people fucked me over, how to walk through the world still trusting even though I had lost a lot of trust, and how do I stop blaming myself for other people's inadequacies when they let me down. And that going through that process has been really helpful in helping me be a business advisor, because my job is to point out the red flags before they show up. It's to point out the blind spots before they show up, and to help people be the best kind of leader that they can be. And I do that with this thing that we call compass questions.
Compass questions.
Yeah. So I believe that in every business, if somebody is daring to have the courage to open a business, they usually have everything that they need inside of them, other than the technical kind of how to read a profit and loss statement, blah, blah, blah. All that shit you can learn. But a compass question is a question that, when answered with integrity and with an open heart and an open mind, will show you the direction of where you need to go with what you want to do. And the job of an advisor or a business consultant is to know what the right questions are to ask.
That's where all the sauce is.
All the sauce is there.
All the sauce is in the question. Talking about, it's interesting. I wasn't expecting us to get into this aspect of the conversation, but this is why I fucking love doing this. But I think, just to build on what you said, Lee, is the way at least my philosophy for myself is, if I can go to bed at night and when I put my head on the pillow, I'm at peace with myself, with all the good and all the bad and mistakes and everything I've done. If I can get to that place every night, honestly, for me, I'm living a great life. Because I think everything that we've been talking about so far is about, it's you and yourself, and putting, like you said, prioritizing yourself, putting those boundaries, walking away when things, don't feel right. And I think a lot of people in the world struggle. We're very good at putting everyone else first. Very good. Easy. I'll help you. I'll do this.
Easy, Tiger. We live in Dubai. Not a lot of people here
Well,
are happy with putting other people first.
Well, yeah, maybe not. But in general,
but people like us
in general,
are very good at putting other people first.
Yeah.
To a fault.
It's, I think every strength has a weakness and every weakness
100%.
has a strength. So it's just about how you manage it. But transitioning back onto coffee,
Yeah.
I love that we took that detour. So I didn't know you were a barista for 15 years. So I have a very close friend of mine who's a barista, and he's the one who got me into coffee. When we spoke last week, right after we got off the call, I sent him the course. I'm like, bro, I'm speaking to Lee next week. Check this out. And he's the one also who helped me with my studio. So Amin, much love, shout out. He gets all nervous and stuff. So fuck you, take it. So I've been going on my coffee journey kind of with him, and he worked as a barista for a couple of years. Now, from my perspective, just to touch on the barista aspect for a sec, I think not just here but globally, it's a very underappreciated position. Because I think you are, in terms of running a cafe, in terms of the success of a cafe, you can have the best beans in the world. You could have the fanciest machine, this, that, design, whatever, but that guy standing there. And once I got into coffee, I started appreciating baristas so much more, because I'd walk in, they're like, hey, how you doing, whatever, what do you want? I'm like, oh, this is what I like and whatever. And then they'll suggest things and they have the knowledge. So I think it's a very underappreciated position in coffee. And I think that's probably the best place to start if you're going to, regardless of what avenue of coffee you go into. What are your thoughts?
I got into being a barista for a couple of reasons. But having had the vision that I want to be an international singer, as well as loving coffee, I knew that being a barista was going to teach me how to be of service. And It did. And in Australia at the time, like I had gone from earning a corporate salary to earning about $10 an hour. Very quickly, the specialty coffee industry started becoming a thing, and the average price now for a barista in Australia is about $30 an hour.
Wow, it's 3x.
And not just it's 3x, but people who are baristas and do it as a full-time job, it's a respected, legitimate profession. And you can, if you manage your money well, you can actually like have a family and be the next generation of business owner. And we don't have a tipping culture in Australia. So it is the employer's responsibility to pay the employee's wage. When I moved to America and I established Elixir Specialty Coffee there, it was the second time I'd lived in America. And the first time I'd lived in America, I was a barista there. So I got to see it from a couple of different perspectives. And so I was there, Obama 1, Obama 2, Trump 1. And in Obama 1, the specialty coffee industry, everyone was still paupers. But they were excited because there's this new industry emerging and we're going to be fine. The problem was that didn't eventuate because the barista was still seen as a transitionary job. It's the job that you do while you're trying to figure out what the fuck you want to do.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. And so business owners still saw it, even in Obama too. It is the customer's responsibility to subsidize the employee's wage through tipping.
Yeah, tipping in the States is absolutely ridiculous.
Right. Now let's look at the Emirates. Are we going to go there?
We can go.
Okay. In the Emirates, there is a culture here where the average barista is making somewhere between 1.5 and 3.5 thousand dirham a month.
Yeah, that's
no 3.5. Yeah, 3,500 dirham.
Yeah.
Right. Now, when you think about what the average monthly rent of a professional is looking for in the UAE, we're looking at around somewhere between 8 and 12,000 a month.
Average, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's about right.
These guys are getting paid max 3,500.
Yeah.
And so that leaves a question about how serious they're being taken as professionals. Now, these guys are professional. They are all certified and they're all hungry to be the best that they can be, right?
Sure.
But you can't live in the UAE on 3,500 a month and still have enough money to send back home.
Yeah, that's true.
And so what happens is that their salary is not being subsidized by the consumer because there's not really a tipping culture here either.
Yeah, not really.
Right?
It's very dependent, yeah.
Their salary is being subsidized by the suppliers.
Okay.
So what's happening there is that there is a culture where baristas are getting paid a commission and they are the gatekeepers for suppliers who get accepted or don't get accepted into a cafe.
Okay.
So in America, the customer is subsidizing the barista's wages. In the UAE, the supplier is subsidizing the barista's wages. The reason that that's a problem is because you're now no longer working for your employer.
Yeah, you have a different incentive now, don't you?
And that leads to, in my mind, it leads to trouble down the road.
Sure.
On an industry level.
Yeah.
Much like it has in America.
Exactly, yeah.
So in 2024, we started to see Starbucks employees unionizing. We started to see independents who had multiple cafes, their staff were unionizing or they were walking off the job. And the reason they were doing that was because they didn't feel that they were being fairly compensated for the work that they were doing, and they felt that they were working in unsafe environments. Now, the industry in America is 20 years older than what the industry is here.
Of course. I would say coffee here, just speaking from, I don't know how long you've been here, but I remember, so I got into coffee in about 2019. That's when I started getting into coffee. I'd say around 2015, 14, like towards my last couple of years at university is when I discovered like cold brew. And for example, raw, shout out Kim.
I was going to say, you had the OG on your podcast.
I did have the OG on my podcast. Kim,
shout out to Kim.
Shout out to Kim.
I mean, Kim is the person who started it all.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Here in the Middle East, Kim is the OG.
Yeah. So that is when, for the first time in my life, I grew up, I'm like, okay, coffee is a Nescafe. That's all I knew. That's literally all I knew.
Or Rakwa.
Or
Dalla, or any of the ways that our parents drink it.
Exactly. And then once I started to see that, I'm like, okay, this is new. This is something new. But again, still around that time, it was not too big. But I would say when I moved back from Amsterdam in 2020, and when I just started getting into coffee, the last 4 years have been unbelievable here in terms of the amount of the competition, the quality. So my friend Amin, so he was working as a barista in Canada. So he would tell me, because I live here, I'm used to being able to get a geisha 24/7 whenever I want. He's like, Khalid, you don't understand. Like in Canada, that is like, let's say out of 20 coffee shops, maybe one is going to have premium beans, like that. So I think not just here, but across the region, because there is more I think people are willing to spend more here compared to maybe other places. That is what's drawn all of it. But kind of like what we were talking about earlier, it's going to be interesting to see now over the next 10 years, how the coffee market here is going to shift, because I think the saturation kind of has to correct at some point.
I did some analysis for a workshop that I ran the beginning of 2024. And for the 3.6 million people that live in Dubai, take a guess how many businesses there are that serve coffee.
I think you mentioned to me on the call last week, but I think it was a couple of hundred, was it?
It's 26,000.
What? 26,000?
I went through the data myself. I pulled it off the Economic Ministry's website.
Sure.
I pulled the raw data. I did the analysis. It's 26,000.
Wow.
That's cafes, cafeterias, kiosks, restaurants, roasteries, hotels that serve coffee. There are 26,000 businesses that sell coffee.
Wow.
And we are in a situation where when you look at an industry like Australia and in America, the next generation of business owners come from within the industry. They come from the baristas. They come from the coffee roasters who aspire to one day be able to afford to open their own business that takes their craft and turns it into something that they can perhaps work for themselves in.
Sure.
We don't have that culture here.
Yeah.
When you're earning 3,500 dirham a month, where are you going to get the money to spend 1 million dirham on a business?
Yeah, that's true.
And so, and a lot of people don't understand what kind of margins we're looking at in a cafe. And there was recently a reel that was released of a local here in the Emirates talking about that the things that are going on in coffee are not real. Like, don't listen to the people who are telling you that the supply chain is broken. The supply chain is so super fucked.
Yeah.
because of this one thing I'm about to tell you.
Okay.
People look at the price of a cup of coffee and they say, man, that's a profitable product. Because they take the COGS, the cost of goods sold, and then they say, okay, so if I'm going to sell this thing, I'm going to talk in dollars for a second.
Sure.
If we're gonna sell this coffee for $5, and I look at the COGS and it's about $1, I'm gonna make $4 a cup. Man, if I sell a couple of hundred of those a day, my staff are costing me next to nothing, which they are costing you next to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And my father owns this land, so I should be good. Let me tell you, the problem is that we are very OpEx heavy industry.
Exactly, yeah.
So while people think, okay, I'm going to be looking at making about 70% gross profit, you're actually looking at making, if you do this well, 3% net profit.
3%.
That's the industry average.
Wow.
I have seen thousands of profit and loss statements as a business advisor.
Wow.
It's 3% net profit is if you do well as a cafe owner, and it's 8% if you're a roastery owner. But in 2024, all of that changed. Why? Because the futures market that we operate in has been historically, the historical average of it is so far below the cost of production to grow the coffee that generationally, instead of passing on wealth, they pass on debt, coffee farmers.
Yeah.
The script was flipped. And the price of coffee on the futures market 3x'd. It went from being somewhere around $1, $1.20, where our average now sits between $3 and $3.50.
Wow.
And that's the futures market for the shitty commercial grade coffee. If you look at the impact that that's going to have, the way the coffee is traded is when you buy containers of the coffee, there has to be an agreement that's made between you and the person that's bringing the coffee over.
Sure. Sorry to interrupt you, Lee, just because you mentioned a really important point, and this is something I really wanted to dive into. You mentioned that a lot of people don't understand the coffee supply chain.
At all.
We have, I'm telling you, even myself, like I might have slightly more information. It's just
there we go.
It's incredibly complex. And
Yeah.
I didn't know how many moving parts there were. So I think what would be useful just to give the audience an understanding. Just like how I love what you said on the podcast, like ask ChatGPT, tell it to me like I'm a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
I'm the 5-year-old, okay? Tell me, just walk me through real quick, what is the coffee supply chain? Because I think people need to understand that first before we dive into what you were just talking about further.
Really fantastic question. Most people don't know that coffee is a fruit.
That blew my mind when I found out.
More accurately, it's the seed that comes from a fruit.
Yes.
Right? And this seed is grown in many different regions around the world. Now, for those who are Muslim, they will be very proud of coffee as a part of their heritage because, it was birthed in Ethiopia, in the Gesher region of Ethiopia, and in Mocha. And then Saint Ali took the seeds from there and started growing it in Yemen. And then started roasting it in Yemen. So the birthplace of the coffee plant is Ethiopia.
Yes.
Or as they called it back then, Habasha.
Okay.
The birthplace of coffee as a drink is Yemen. And then from there, Brother Baba Budan took it to different countries and blah, 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 blah. Now coffee is grown in a specific part of the planet.
Yeah.
right? It requires a specific environment. When a coffee producer who typically either inherits the land or is some white guy who decides, fuck this, I want out of the corporate world, I'm going to go and buy a farm in Costa Rica.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking just like the corporate person does, who does a great V60, turns around and says, I want to live the easy life, I'm going to go and open a cafe. Both of them don't realize how fucking hard it's going to be. When you have a seedling of coffee, from the time it's a seedling and you put it in the ground to the time it starts to produce fruit that can be turned into a seed is 3 years.
That's insane.
If everything goes right.
Also that.
And right now, over the past decade, what we've been it's become very apparent that the forces outside of the vacuum that we expect to happen have created absolute chaos for just the growing of the plant. The climate has changed. The soil is depleted. The inputs have gone up 3x. That's just from the time that Russia invaded Ukraine. Because most people don't know this, 60% of the world's fertilizer comes out of Ukraine and Russia. Most of the food is grown in Brazil, but Brazil can't grow it because their topsoil is completely depleted. So they have to get fertilizer from Russia and Ukraine.
Really? Oh, I had no idea.
Most people don't.
Yeah, I had no clue. Okay.
So we are in these situations where everything is interconnected.
Yes.
Right? So the weather patterns have been playing a huge role in this. And it's not just coffee. It's also other commodities like cacao. Do you know what happened with cacao in 2024?
No.
Okay. If you like chocolate, just like if you like coffee, you should expect that either your chocolate is going to become mixed with other shit or it's going to become very, very expensive. And the reason is because cacao is mostly grown on the Ivory Coast in Côte d'Ivoire. There are some cacao regions in places like Colombia, but the majority of it, like 80% of it, is in the Ivory Coast. And what they do is after they deplete the land because of the cacao trees, they just move a little bit further. And they just move a little bit further, not every season, but every now and then. They've almost reached the sea.
Wow.
Right? Why? Because when we grow these things, we grow it as a commodity. We don't work with the land. So we strip the land of all of its nutrients. And when we do that, it's got nothing left to give us back. And then the climate turns around and says, I'm going to fuck back. And so what happened was there was a severe weather incident that happened in Côte d'Ivoire and in the Ivory Coast that rendered the trees no longer viable.
All of them?
All of them. At the end of the harvest. So they had harvested the cacao and then they had to pull the trees out. Guess how long it takes for a cacao tree to fruit? 7 years. So whatever cacao was grown and harvested at the time, we have to wait another 7 years for the majority of that cacao to be back on the market. So this is where supply and demand economics becomes a thing.
Mm.
Because the cost of cacao went from 2,000 USD on the futures markets per cubic ton to 12,000.
What?
It went down to 7,000 for a second, and then it went back up above 10, and it has stayed there.
Wow.
Coffee did the same thing. And I recently sent you a reel.
Yeah.
Of somebody who was saying, don't believe what people are saying. The coffee market is being manipulated by people. If anyone is listening to this and they saw that reel, I would encourage you to completely disregard everything that was said in that reel And if you want proof that everything that was said in that reel is a whole bunch of horse shit, respectfully, go listen to the podcast. Go listen to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward. What this person is saying is that, first of all, nobody has direct relationships with farmers, which is bullshit. They're saying that all farmers sell their cherries and none of them process their own cherries. That's bullshit. They're saying that there's no such thing as weather problems that are going with the farms. That's bullshit. What he's trying to say is that speculators in the futures market are the ones who are driving the price of coffee up, and they're driving the price of cacao up, right? Now, taken on its own, you might think, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. But the part of that that's being missed is that market fundamentals happen to be underpinning what speculators are doing. And the speculators are not doing it because they just don't have anywhere else to put their money. The speculators are speculating in coffee because of what's happening with supply and demand economics. And so the speculators aren't there driving the market. The speculators are looking at the fact that Brazil didn't get water, that Colombia had a La Nina for 3 years, then it had a drought for a year, and it's going back into a La Nina for what's expected to be another 5 years. All of these things impact the different coffee growing regions.
Of course.
In Ethiopia, we had a big kind of thing that happened on the podcast where somebody from Ethiopia had come on the podcast and said, listen, over the past few decades, people have been encouraging Ethiopian coffee farmers, who are typically very poor, to grow eucalyptus trees. When you put a eucalyptus tree in the ground, it steals the water from every possible source it can get. And on top of that, it sheds its leaves onto the ground, which deposit a kind of resin into the soil and deem that soil it's impossible to grow anything in that soil.
Yeah.
If you want to reinvigorate that soil after that, it's about a 20-year process. Wow. You have to remove the topsoil and then burn the soil that's under it. You literally have to put it on fire to burn the rest of the resin. This is what's going on in coffee. This is what's driving the price of coffee up. And when people who are ignorant to the fact that there are real people who grow these crops, who have inherited generations worth of debt, and are saying, if you're not going to pay us a fair price for this coffee, fuck you and fuck your businesses. Because I don't have to do this. I have an education and I can go off and be an investment banker. But I am doing this because I inherited this and this is our family's legacy. And if I don't have a good enough reason to continue doing it, I'm going to sell it to a property developer. And so you have younger people now saying, we require a fair payment. So it's not market manipulation. It's people saying, enough. We know you love your coffee, and we love that you love your coffee, but we're tired as farmers of subsidizing this industry.
Yeah.
And the consumer is saying, but why is it so expensive to get a cup of coffee? You've been lied to. You are being sold a cup of coffee that does more harm than it does good. When you go to the supermarket, you see a kilo of bananas. You get to make a decision about whether that kilo of bananas is affordable to you or not. If it's not affordable, you walk away. You buy apples instead. Coffee is an agricultural product just the same as bananas and broccoli are.
Yeah.
And we as an industry have failed because we have not manage the expectations of the consumer to help them understand that this is an agricultural product where the cost of production goes up some years and the cost of production goes down some years. And the yield goes up some years and the yield goes down some years. And because of this, we have created no stability in the industry. We have a saturated market on the consuming end. And because of that, the consumer has become accustomed to cheap coffee. Well, now the cost of coffee is 3x. And we haven't even spoken about what shipping's doing. This time last year, it cost $5,000 to get a container from Brazil to America. That same container, if you can find it, because there's a container shortage, is costing you $15,000 USD.
15,000. This is that was a lot to take in, honestly. I know we have, and we're gonna get back into it, but the reason I wanted to just pause here for a sec is maybe I knew a little bit, but I did not know like all of this at all. It seems like a very, very bleak picture, and it probably is. It's not just being painted, that way. That seems to be what's happening. So, because when I was listening to your podcast, when you Bob and Michelle were having this conversation about not only the corruption side, the education side, like this whole aspect, I started to think, I'm like, okay, how do you fix this problem? Because it's like you said, because it's a chain and everything's interconnected, and all the climate, the cost of the coffee, the time it takes to produce it, to regenerate the soil, like all these things are not quick fixes. And then the question then becomes, at least in my mind, I'm like, all right, let's say I'm gonna stop everything and I want to fix these problems. Then I start to think about, I'm like, okay, but where do I start? What is the most important part in this chain? And I think maybe everyone will give you a different answer to that. But I wanted to ask you, because I was curious. I'm like, if you had the ability, Lee, you're like, I can influence the first change, to kickstart this cleanup, reset process, where would you want to start?
In 2025, I don't have to do anything. None of us have to do anything. The market forces are going to take care of that.
Okay, tell me more.
We have been saying since 2018, hey guys, down the road, because this is a broken, dysfunctional industry, if we don't start fixing it now, we're going to get into trouble. We're borrowing or stealing from our future. We need to strengthen the position of the coffee farmer. We need to bring down our debt. We need to help the consumer understand that the price that they're paying isn't going to be enough to absorb how much this increase is going to cost all of us. Some people listened, some people didn't. What became apparent was that eventually, when a market gets saturated, there's going to be forces that force a correction. 2008 was a fantastic example of that.
Absolutely.
In the financial sector.
Yeah.
So we have been saying since 2018, the dragon is coming, the dragon is coming, the dragon is coming. And most people said, fuck you and fuck you, dragon. There's no such thing as dragons. The dragon is coming, the dragon is coming, the dragon is coming. A couple of people went, this chick has been right about a couple of things. Maybe we should take a look. Oh, fuck. The dragon is coming, the dragon is coming, the dragon is coming. People started to see the dragon in the distance. But then they thought, maybe it's not going to come near us. Maybe it'll be fine. The dragon has now burnt down the village. There's nothing more to be done than to let it burn. Because at this point, the market forces are already irreversible. So what we need to do right now is let it burn. There's no more time left for a correction to happen. Banks are no longer lending to farmers. Banks are no longer lending to businesses who want to establish. They're no longer lending to, well, not as much anyway, to the middleman who is supposed to fund the movement of the coffee. And that's what I was trying to explain, what I should have filled in. When a coffee producer grows coffee, they mill it and then they want to sell it.
Yeah.
There's a couple of ways that they can do that. They can either have a direct relationship with a coffee roaster or a green coffee buyer. Now, that's the rarer option. It's becoming more prominent, but it is the more direct way for the coffee farmer to find a business relationship that's values-based. The more traditional way that that's been traded is that the coffee producer is approached by an exporter. And the exporter typically has an importing company in consuming countries, and the importing staff will go out and they have a sales team and they will find roasters who want to buy that coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Now, somebody has to take on the risk of paying the farmer for that coffee and being the intermediary for that. So you can imagine that from the time the coffee is bought to the time it gets put on the ship and it's sent to the consuming country, there are a couple months. And then it's going to sit in that consuming country until it's sold and roasted. Who's going to bear the burden of that debt? And what's the arrangement that's happening with the coffee farmer? Because sometimes the coffee farmer is going to get paid in their entirety. Sometimes they're getting paid in different stages. Sometimes they're saying, I don't want to wait. I'm not even going to process the coffee. I'm just going to sell it as cherry. I want my cash right now. It is so complex and so complicated that there is no one way that this happens.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. That most people who say, I make a fucking mean V60 or I'm a good coffee roaster, I'm just going to go and open a business, they're unaware of the fact that they are now a custodian of coffee that has touched about 100 hands before it's gotten to them.
Yeah.
There are farmers involved, there are pickers involved, there are quiotes involved, there are logistical staff involved, customs staff, you know, all the salespeople and traders and all that kind of stuff. It's so complicated. And yet we think of instant coffee as coffee. We think of cafe coffee. We think of the geshes as the same way as we call that coffee as well. We call roasted coffee. All of it has a branding problem. Coffee itself has a branding problem. And we have done a fucking terrible job of informing and educating the consumer about what they're participating in. Coffee is rife with corruption across the entire supply chain, from the farm all the way through to the cafe. There is slavery that's involved. There's sex trafficking that's involved. There's money laundering that's involved across the entire world. And so for a brand like Map It Forward, where we are really seen as like, we occupy a very, very unique spot in coffee. We are completely neutral, and we also are the safest place for people to come and talk about what the reality of the system is. The only thing that's going to solve the main problem in coffee, which is yield, is going to be regenerative agriculture and agroforestry. So step one is we need to let market forces create the culling. None of us can do anything about that. It's time for popcorn.
Okay.
In the process of that happening, we have to help coffee producers transition to regenerative agriculture. Why? Because that is what's going to give them the confidence to have a stable supply.
Yeah.
Why regenerative agriculture? because they're working with nature. They're no longer dependent on Russia or Ukraine or any of these people to give them the inputs that they need to farm. They learn about biochar, which means that they never have to buy fertilizers again. They intercrop. So do you know most coffee farmers go to a supermarket to buy their food? They have been told by their government organizations and associations that if they grow their own food, that it will steal nutrients from the soil and create a deficit for their crops. So they have been lied to.
Yeah.
So if they intercrop, they can have food for their families and for their staff. So what we're starting to see is that farmers who do regenerative agriculture and agroforestry and intercrop and grow food that puts nutrients back into the soil, they are now a preferred employer for pickers. Because historically, people have been paid such a low price for coffee, they haven't been able to pay pickers. So this migration that you hear that's happening from Central America to the southern border of the United States, a lot of that is agricultural workers in coffee.
Really?
And so what you find, we don't have the workforce to pick the coffee. So step one, demand destruction, to talk in technical economic terms.
Sure.
Step two, we need to increase the supply.
Sure.
To stabilize the pricing. If we can do that price stabilization, we may see a return for the workforce, but I doubt it.
On the regenerative agriculture part, because listening to the podcast you guys did, this is the first time I've heard of
regenerative ag.
Yeah, regenerative ag, that's the right term. And biochar and intercropping and all that. One of the biggest things that blew my mind from listening to that conversation was, because we've talked about how climate change affects coffee.
Yeah.
I didn't know that coffee could be a potential solution to climate change.
Everything about climate change.
That's insane.
Yeah.
It's because it's the thing that is killing it is also the solution to fight it in a way.
Right. The right question to ask there is why?
Thank you. Help me get there.
The corporate interests from big ag are the things that are stopping the solution. Why? Because you can create, to give people some context, biochar is a technology that was created by, we believe, the Aztecs. And basically what you do is you burn organic matter without oxygen. It's a very specific process, and depending on what your requirements are, there are different ways to do it. But essentially what happens is that it's called pyrolysis, and if you burn organic matter, wood, tree cuttings, compost, stuff that you compost with, if you burn that matter correctly, what will happen is that it creates a kind of like a honeycomb structure that when you bury it in the ground, microbiome in the soil create a home there.
Okay, because of that, the way that structure is,
they're safe.
Okay, interesting.
And because they have a structure that they can build their colonies in, it's the microbiome that start contributing the nitrogen and when they eat the organic matter that's in the ground, they start contributing the potassium and the nitrogen and the calcium and all of this kind of stuff. And how do you do that? You get a kilo of rice, you boil it, you put it in like a pillowcase. Then you go bury it in the forest next to your farm for a week. A week later you come back and you will see that there is a rainbow of bacteria growing on that pillowcase, because the naturally occurring bacteria in the forest, because the forest is a stable ecosystem, it is eating the rice as a food source. You take that back and you create what's called a biofabrica. or
Okay.
a biofactory.
Okay.
You basically put it in a tank of water, give it a sugar source, and let it proliferate. You then take that water and you spray it into the soil, and you are putting the bacteria back into the soil.
Okay.
There are no chemicals involved in this.
Okay.
Big ag cannot make any money out of this.
Yeah. Coffee sounds a lot like listening to like the way you've described coffee and the complexities and, you know, the corruption and the things that are holding it back. When I was doing my research, I was like, this sounds a lot like the medical industry. So
Is that the industry you're from?
No, so I spent a year in that industry while I was living in Amsterdam. On the sales side, we're selling a platform, not products.
Right.
But I went down, you know, the rabbit hole because I had to learn so about, you know, the laws and stuff. And then the cases that like I read about and the death that I read about and like all these things. I think like medical is one thing, you know, and it's known worldwide, you know, that the corruption that is involved in that. I think whether it's in coffee, whether it's in medicine, whether it is if I'm in the driving seat and I have the power, I have no incentive to do this. So the question that I start to think about is the only way you force that is it's a volume game. If everyone is starting to go down that route, then it doesn't make sense for your business anymore to not be following and entering, you know, that route. So on the
Regenerative ag.
Coming back to regenerative ag, also something I was thinking about is what is that time frame in terms of, let's say that now everything's burning, right? To get us back to, you know, a good topsoil that we can actually start regenerating the land and coffee and stuff. What kind of time frame am I looking at now?
If you're a coffee producer,
Yeah.
7 years.
Shit.
Yep.
So when you were saying earlier that we've reached an irreversible point, would it be fair to say that coffee has changed forever, full
Forever.
stop? That's it.
Forever.
It's a new game. It's a brand new game now.
And that's why I say we just have to sit back and let the natural forces do what they need to do.
Okay.
In 2018, we were at the last moment of being able to turn the ship. 2024 was, in my opinion, the year that the door closed.
Coffee Armageddon.
And it's not just in coffee. What you're seeing happen in coffee is happening in the medical industry, the healthcare industry, in tech. It's happening in everything.
Absolutely.
The world is going through a shift of consciousness.
Yeah.
And people are being called to audit the role that they want to play in that shift of consciousness. The people who have fucked with other people are going to hurt in 2025. The people who have built sustainably, they're not going to have anything taken away from them. The hardest part of 2025 and beyond for those people is going to be that they have to sit around and watch people be in pain. And for people who register high in empathy, that's hard.
Yeah.
But I earned all the things that I built.
Fair.
And I built a podcast when everybody told me I was crazy because we don't make any money off this podcast. And when I started it, the people around me, like really well-respected CEOs in my industry, said, listen, most people can't understand any of the stuff that you're talking about. And most people really want to just look at coffee competitions and latte art and stuff like that. And I said, yeah, but I think that one day people are going to get fatigued and they're going to get tired of dessert for dinner.
Yeah.
And they're going to want to figure out who has been consistently telling them the truth. And it's going to take me 1,000 episodes before I know whether this is going to be worth it.
I think you're at like 1,200 something,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, if I saw. That's insane. That is, I can't clap for you honestly enough. That's an unbelievable achievement. You've been doing it now, what, 8-9 years?
8 years.
I think I'm like, 120 episodes here. I'm like in the game. That is ridiculous. Really well done.
Thank you. But the thing is, my twin sister are the last women in a long line of women who come from farming families in Syria. And shame on me because I don't have children and I'm not going to have children, shame on me if the lasting legacy of those women isn't something to behold what they deserve. And so I had made a clear decision that if I was going to create a legacy, it would be in their name. And it would be something that changed generations. So because I don't have kids to look after and a husband to look after and all that kind of stuff, I have one luxury. I get to do whatever the fuck I want with my time.
Fair. Facts.
And so because of that, I saw an injustice that was going on and I just leaned into it.
Yeah.
And I knew that paydays don't come from fixing shit. It comes from breaking them and providing a solution that really doesn't fix things. But the world's going to be broken forever if those of us who can fix things don't start figuring out how we can participate with integrity.
Mm.
And as we were talking off air, I said to you, Warren Buffett's got this saying, when the tide goes out, that's when you know who's swimming naked. We're there. We're there.
Yeah.
And people who took shortcuts are about to get found out.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who built for the long term are about to get found out. Because most people who are building for the long term are building quietly. And most people who want to build for the long term don't have the stamina to do it. They don't have the stamina. We release an episode every day.
Yeah, that's fucking ridiculous, by the way.
But this is not about being famous. It's not about clicks and likes and stuff like that. This is not an easy podcast to listen to if you just want to fuck us about. Like, this is listening to the real problems that are going on in the coffee supply chain.
Yeah.
And it's the smart people in coffee who are listening to this.
Yeah.
And I hats off to our, like, the consumers who are out there that are saying, well, the people like you who are like, this is really interesting. I'm going to listen to this and I'm going to see, like, what actually is going on in coffee. But a lot of people don't want to pay attention. They just want to take and take and take and take and take.
Yeah.
That time is done.
Mm.
Not just in coffee, in everything.
In everything, yeah.
And if you were somebody who just took without putting back, which is exactly what regenerative agriculture is about, you want to make sure that you're putting into the land so that it finds its own balance. You don't need to be spending money on very many things. The land will find its balance. And it doesn't need very much for you to start that process. But if all you're doing is taking from it, eventually you're going to strip the soil bare. And folks, like, if you're listening at home to this, please remember, this is food security.
Mm.
This is exactly our future on a global level. And farmers are realizing, well, particularly the younger farmers are realizing their payday is coming. They just have to hold on for a little bit longer because the power is ending up in their hands.
They're the source. Without them, and I think this kind of moves us nicely onto the educational aspect of this, and as a consumer. So listening to the podcast, that specific episode, after I finished listening to it, because I'm a consumer of coffee and a big consumer of coffee, and I'm going to be honest, I never really knew how bad it is. That story that I think Michelle shared about that farmer and he said, this is what I deserve, what I think I need to pay for like my 11 kids and so on. And he was like laughed out of there, like in his face. And it was, I don't know why.
It's humiliating.
It was like, it like struck a chord in me, especially because this is something I love. I love coffee. So it kind of, but I'm not saying I'm special or anything, but it made me, for the first time, be like, I need to start paying more attention to this. Where am I getting my coffee? How is it done? And so on. And on the educational side, what Bob said, which was very interesting, is like, we need to go to where the consumers are. You know, we have to delivering that message. I love that that segment, that series they created, One Big Island, and how it's short, it's funny, but it gives you what you need, and it's relevant to how to get people's attention, you know, nowadays. So I know the education part is important, but like with anything, education alone is not enough. And it kind of leans into now, I think globally, coffee consumer education has grown, especially along with the growth of specialty coffee, because we've become interested in much more finer details. It's not like, oh, I just want a decaf, I want a black, I want an espresso. Now I want, where is it from? What are the flavor profiles? How does it work? You know, so we're much more educated on coffee in general, which I think is a good thing. But now that's like phase one. Now phase two is all this new information, and like that's why your podcast is an amazing resource for anyone who cares to get into this. Is okay, now I need to figure out really what's going on. And then step 3 is the hardest part, is because a lot of times we know a lot of things, but we don't
take action.
Thank you. And that is the holy grail. Like, I know the education part is important, but my question to you is, if we have the education part and we're working on that now, how do we work on the implementation part? Step 3 is what it's all about.
So it's a really great question. And I go back to my previous kind of perspective that the natural forces are going to take care of that for everybody. Why?
Okay.
Because supply and demand economics. The demand for coffee consumption is continuing to rise and outpace the supply of coffee. The supply of coffee continues to go down, despite what the USDA report and despite what the ICO, the International Coffee Organization, they're all, and I can't understand why, but they are all misreporting the amount of coffee that's being grown, and then a couple months later, they adjust their numbers. The yield of coffee is going down year on year.
Yeah.
So we as consumers, not just of coffee, but of everything, should start to become what I call conscious consumers. We should be conscious consumers that ask about where our food is coming from. If you do regenerative agriculture in coffee, you never need to spray Roundup.
Really?
Ever. And when you follow the science, this gluten intolerance that a lot of people are talking about is actually a glyphosate intolerance.
A glyphosate intolerance.
Which is what Roundup is.
Oh. That's some interesting shit. Yeah. I did not know that. And the reason, just to quick jump in for a second, because and this is something I've heard not just from, I've seen with like my family and like my brother. So my brother studied in the States and he came back with a gluten intolerance. My wife studied in the States. She came back with a nut allergy. It's insane. And the reason I say this is I recently started, over the last, I think, year and a half, really prioritizing health, doing genetic tests and figuring out, okay, I can eat this, don't eat this, all that stuff. I've never understood how important what you put in your body is, like on a food perspective, on a coffee perspective, just for your health. And what's crazy, even crazier, is I have to pay double the price for the thing that's actually good. And I'm sure that applies to coffee too, which is insane.
And so because it's getting harder to grow it, we're going to go through a process that is transitionary for coffee. And as we were saying, businesses are going to go out of business. across the entire supply chain. And as that process is happening, we have to support coffee that has been grown through regenerative ag. So people should be going to cafes and saying, how was this coffee grown? Do you know the answer to that question, Mr. Barista person? Does the company that you work for have a relationship with the coffee farmer? There are plenty of brands that you can find online that will directly talk to you about regenerative agriculture. Learn to make your coffee at home. Find a way. Here in the Emirates, going to a cafe is a social event.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Instead of going to a bar in the West, they go to cafes here.
Exactly.
Sure. Have tea.
Yeah.
Have coffee. Whatever. But the majority of your coffee drinking should start to come from regenerative ag. And the reason you know that, like, I'm not selling anything here, because regenerative ag is a free way and a sustainable way for the coffee farmer.
It's a method.
To not be dependent on agriculture. And people want to silence that message.
Of course.
So if you can go and find people who are buying coffee from farmers who engage in regenerative agriculture, you are conspiring to the success of the farmer and the business that you're working with. And that's how we get it to where it's going to need to be over the long term.
Sure.
But it is the long term.
Yeah.
And what you should expect, despite what some people are saying here in the Emirates, it is not market manipulation. Of course, there is some market manipulation happening, because it always does.
Not isolated.
But it's not, market manipulation is not the driving force behind the increase in pricing.
Sure.
It is so complex and so complicated as to why the market is being driven in an upward direction. And if you want the details, go and listen to the podcast. We talk about it ad nauseum.
Yeah.
Right? But the main thing to understand is it's getting harder to grow coffee. There's less people that are doing it. And the forces that are able to move coffee from origin to consuming countries are getting politicized. The climate is playing a role. You know, the amount of traffic that goes through the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal has reduced by 50% because drought has reduced the levels of both of those water structures.
That's insane. That's trillions of dollars lost.
A year, right? So when people go on podcasts and say the coffee price is being manipulated, and that's what's causing, it's a misrepresentation. People are just driving the price of coffee up because they feel like it. That's me misquoting somebody, but essentially that's paraphrasing what he's saying.
Sure.
When you say things like that, it stops people from being curious about what's the real reason behind the cost of coffee going up. At the moment, here in the Emirates and across the Middle East, there's a lot of coffee here.
Yeah.
Green coffee.
Yes.
So our experience of this price increase is going to be delayed. But as we work through what's happening, what you're going to experience is that your coffee is going to continue to taste shitter and shitter and shitter.
We're going to notice it over time.
Because the coffee that's here is old crop.
Of course.
And so instead of buying new crop coffee, which is so expensive, they're going to use the crop that's here. Sure. And it will continue to taste worse and worse and worse every month.
Yeah.
But they have to move the coffee.
Of course.
And the only way they can afford to continue with the pricing models that they've got, which coffee here in the Emirates is really high compared to most places in the world. Even compared to Saudi. Saudi is about to undergo a very interesting shift in pricing. The whole landscape is going to change all over the world. And what you will see is that because people don't have access to the funding that's required to keep green coffee sitting in their warehouse, their runway that's left on their business is however much green coffee they've got left in their warehouse right now.
Yeah, that's scary. That's a scary proposition.
I'm optimistic about it.
Yeah.
I think that we're going to see a culling that is going to be a healthy culling.
Yeah.
And is going to
Yeah.
have a positive feedback loop
Sure.
into the industry.
Sure. Listen.
You're welcome.
Yeah. First of all, on a personal level, thank you so much, because I'm just like, I just need some popcorn and just to sit and listen to you talk about
Thank
coffee,
you.
because this is all so new to me and it's so interesting. Look, the picture does seem bleak. But it seems that we're reaching, rock bottom. Sorry.
Yeah.
And now is we haven't finished it yet, but we need to clear everything out, to rebuild and to restart. And with regenerative ag, it sounds like from your
Hopeful.
perspective. Yeah, it sounds hopeful. It sounds like there is a method.
Yep.
It's not that we can't do it. It's just, how are we going to make this happen? So we've also talked about us as consumers, of the importance of us being more consciously aware and aligning ourselves with brands that have a connection with the farmers and so on. And I think there's a responsibility on both sides, on coffee companies, to provide us with more information about how they work and what they do to make us align with it. Kim said on our podcast, she's like, we emphasize on sharing the farmer story. Because just like I heard that story in your podcast and it touched me, and I was like, it really made me like think for a second. I'm like, oh shit, okay, I need to maybe want to pay more attention to this. That is so, because again, it's just, you're selling a product, but there's lots of great products, but it's the story behind the product that makes you stay with this company or that brand or so on. So that's so important. But also, as consumers, we have a responsibility to take action and to do this. Now, how hopeful am I on that? I don't know. For me, it's a toss-up. Time will tell, kind of like what you said. And I think once everyone's exposed and the culling came, people have gone and left, the ones that stay, I feel, at least I will look at them in a much more optimistic perspective. I'm like, because if you survive that means you're probably doing you're probably doing the right things. That eyebrow raise told me no.
Either that,
or
you are a hyper-capitalized business
that can sustain it.
That there's this thing called carpet bombing. Have you heard of carpet bombing in business?
No.
It's where a business goes into a new market and they establish themselves next to the businesses that already exist in that market, and they engage in predatory pricing.
Oh, so you just undercut the shit out of you, basically.
And they undercut and can stay undercutting for as long as is necessary to put everybody out of business.
Okay.
They don't go in one by one by one by one. They carpet bomb. So they go in and open hundreds of cafes in the space of a month.
Okay.
That's happening. That's about to happen in the US.
Yeah.
There's a Chinese company that has said that they are going to do that in the US and that they're going to think of doing it here in the Middle East.
It's funny, so happy you brought China up, because this is, and I spoke to Kim about this on the podcast briefly, so I went to a coffee place here like a month ago, 2 months ago, and they had coffees from places that I don't usually see coffee from. I had a coffee from, I think, Papua New Guinea. I have like the pictures on my phone, but I forgot. One was from China, and I sent my coffee friend, I'm like, yo, Chinese coffee? Since when? Like, I've heard of it before. Maybe I've tried it once, but like, he's like, yeah, it's from the Yunnan province and whatever. I'm like, okay. This is something I really don't understand, because coffee needs certain conditions to grow. So that's why it's in certain parts of the world, and you can't grow it everywhere. You need altitude, you need good soil, you need so many different things. So when I start seeing coffee come out of different places, I'm like, the two questions I have, I'm like, how is that happening if maybe I'm wrong because I don't know, I don't think you have the same conditions that they would like in this part of the world. And two, how does it, if you weren't a coffee culture like country or a culture typically, how do you start shifting that? For example, just using China as an example, their tea, that's their thing. That's what they're known for. That's what it is. But all of a sudden now I've started to see and taste coffee from that region. So it's just been a mind fuck for me, honestly. I'm just trying to figure out like how this works.
It's a really great question and very well timed in what's happening in the market. China took a minute to get there with the coffee that they're growing in China. If you want to taste a really great coffee from China, there's a roaster in Saudi that he's just sent me a bag of coffee, and it is completely unexpected at how good it is.
Really?
Go to Bunna. He just started an online store, Bunna, in Al Khobar.
Okay. Shout out.
Shout out. Tiny little roaster. But he's dedicated to finding the best coffees he can find. And Ahmed said to me, I'm going to send you this coffee from Uganda, coffee from China, and a coffee from Panama. One, the Panama Gesha, and the coffee from Uganda and from China. Coffee from Uganda is outstanding. And it's a coffee that you can let sit in your cupboard for 6 weeks and it just gets better. But this coffee from China blew my fucking mind.
Really?
And I am not accustomed to that from China. And that is because China does nothing by half.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
And the weather is shifting all over the world. And because of that, there are regions in China where you can now grow coffee.
That's so true.
And on top of that, they have a problem with their youth in China. They can't motivate them to do anything. But what does make the youth happy in China is a company by the name of Luoxin. In English, it's Luckin.
Okay.
Luckin is a coffee company that is opening 2,000 stores a year.
2,000 stores a year.
And they haven't even gotten started.
What?
They're like in year 6 or year 7 or something like that, and they're opening 2,000 stores a year. They're outpacing Starbucks. And Starbucks has realized they can't keep up with them, so they're looking for a local partner to take over.
Wow.
And they can't find them. The government has realized we can keep our youth engaged by propping up this brand. And Luoxin is the company that's going to go to the US. These businesses...
Oh, shit's really about to go down.
Oh, shit's really about to go down.
I did not know it was like that.
Yeah.
I had no idea. Wow.
And look, like, out of interest, who do you think is the biggest purchaser of coffee in Asia?
In Asia? If I go just by who I am aware of, at least, have a coffee culture, I'd have to say either, but they grow their coffee. As a consumer, I'd say either Japan or I'd say Indonesia too, but Indonesia also produce coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Japan don't make coffee. So it depends. If it's consumption, I'd say maybe Japan, just because they can't make their own. But if it's maybe on scale, I'd say maybe Indonesia is probably the biggest one.
At a company level, it's Mitsubishi.
What? Cars and coffee? Well, they do go together, but still.
So the way that the culture is set up, these companies, the more successful they get, the more cash they have available. So they get into other parts of economics.
Yeah.
And Mitsubishi buys a disgusting amount of coffee and sells it within Asia.
I can't believe that.
It's all about food security. And anyone who thinks that commodities are not politicized,
Yeah.
go back to bed.
Yeah, 100%. I 100% agree with you. It's all politics.
And it is about the future, given there's so much that is shifting and volatile all at the same time in the world, securing food is so important, because the last thing that a government wants is unrest in their population. We just saw what happened in Syria.
Yeah.
People are realizing that they actually have the power. When they're unhappy, they have the power.
Yeah.
Shout out to Tahrir Surya. But it is really a moment of transition that we are in as a global population.
Yeah.
And so much is swinging on a political level that people don't know what to trust anymore. And governments are finding that if we can keep our populations fed and with some semblance of confidence that we are doing what's necessary to keep them happy, they'll be fine. You have what's going on in China now.
Mm.
It's really fucking wild.
Yeah, it's insane.
How big a role coffee is playing in global politics and geopolitics.
Yeah. I think the point you made about commodities, because they're commodities, like even I'm just going to speak from my experience. I'm like, that's an apple, that's lettuce, that's coffee.
Right.
It feels very, because it just feels to me very simple. You know, it's like, it's just an apple, you know.
But take away the apple, take away the lettuce, take away the loaf of bread.
I'm going to be very hungry.
Well, and you now have to fight for the banana and the cantaloupe or the rock melon that's left.
Exactly.
With all the other people who have come to the same store. And on top of that, the store may decide, I'm not going to give that to Lee. I'm going to take it out to Khalid at the back. Tell him to meet me at the back. And as long as he gives me a little bit under the table, he can have that banana. And now we've got deeper layers of complexity.
Yeah. No, of course. This has been such an interesting conversation. I really didn't know. I can honestly say I was unaware of I knew it was complex, but I had no idea. It's like, look at the journey we've taken through this conversation, and it's just gone deeper and deeper and deeper and bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, your podcast. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, because you are the largest global coffee podcast, if I'm not mistaken, and you've been doing it now for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I know you had a podcast before that too, Love and Other Delusions,
This is my fifth podcast.
Yeah. So I wanted to round off our conversation for today, like talking about the first of all, just as you as a host, and then getting into Map It Forward. So it's your fourth like you said, it's your fourth podcast. So clearly you are a curious person and you love having conversations, which is why I was dying to have you on the show. I'm like, this would be fantastic. How has I guess I'd love to first ask you, what has your experience as a host taught you about like people and life?
People think that being a host is just what you say on camera, right? No. Being a host is about how to choose the guests, how to choose the direction the conversation is going in, how to make sure that the person that's listening to the podcast wants to stay listening to the podcast. How do you create something over time that is a body of work that contributes in a positive way, rather than contributing to the toxic cancel culture bullshit that keeps going on social media?
Yeah.
I don't want to be a part of that. I want to contribute in a positive way that isn't fluff.
Yeah.
And what I have learnt is that there are more people than you might think that want to conspire with you to make the world better. And if you can be a person hosting a podcast that keeps the path ahead of them clear, so that they can say what's in their heart and what's in their mind, and you can meet them or encourage them to go to higher levels of curiosity and openness during a conversation, the whole discussion takes on a different vibration. You felt it here.
Absolutely.
You did an incredible job at guiding the conversation. We could have gone to the most shallow of shallow levels of coffee. What's your favorite coffee to drink? And where's your favorite? That's bullshit. But you didn't do that. You led me to go to the depths of the discussion, and you dared to take me there, having no idea if it was going to put you out of your comfort zone and me out of my comfort zone. But you read the situation in a way that was like, I trust her and I trust me. That's what a good host is. Congratulations, you did an amazing job.
That's very, very kind of you to say. When I get feedback from other hosts, I take it to heart because this is what I do. So learning from other people and listening to their perspective on how I'm doing is always very appreciative. So thank you very much.
You're
I really
welcome.
appreciate that. And I love how you described it's being a host is not just what you see sitting in this chair. It's everything that you spoke of. And what I do from a business perspective, I help companies and brands launch podcasts.
Nice.
And I tell them, when it comes, you don't understand how important the host is to your show. That will make or break a show. You could have the biggest guest in the world. It doesn't matter.
No,
You might get a couple listens that episode, but to keep coming back, there's one consistent thing, and that's you as the host. And now transitioning that onto coffee, the Daily Pro podcast. I'm curious, because you've been doing it now for quite a while. Because you go really deep into all areas of coffee. I'm so curious, what was your perspective on coffee before you started the podcast? And now 8 years later with over 1,200 episodes, how has that changed for you, or how do you feel about it now?
I was so significantly stupid when I started this podcast. I was so dumb about the industry that I worked in.
Or
I knew fucking
unaware.
nothing. No. I was super dumb,
Fair enough.
which is why I can have the empathy for my audience. I came from the same place that they're at. I wasn't willfully dumb, but we had nothing that was holding us to a standard that required us to get informed. So I was significantly ill-informed. I was occupied by shit that didn't mean anything. And I was building businesses in a silo. This podcast forced me. I remember there were episodes where I needed 3 days to recover because it literally felt like it was breaking my brain having to learn about the futures market, having to keep up with guests in real time and saying to them, hold on, I don't understand what you're saying. And our podcast is unedited. So saying to people, wait, I don't know what a put option is. Can you explain that again? And they explain it again and I'm like, I still don't understand it. So how do I be comfortable with my own discomfort and allowing that to be something that I allow other people to see in real time? It taught me not only about my industry, but it taught me how to be humble. It taught me how to be graceful. It taught me that I get to determine the flow of this podcast. You know, we're in a very privileged position in the fact that we never get people talk shit about our podcast, which is a very unique position. All we get is positive feedback, bar one thing. The only negative feedback, if you can call it negative feedback, is, could you please not swear on your podcast? And in the last series for 2024, what I addressed that for the first time. And I said, listen, guys, I will never not swear on my podcast because it's my podcast. And I get to decide how I talk on my podcast. And my decision has been, I will only ever show up as me. if I ever stop swearing on this podcast, you should stop listening. Because it means that this podcast has been captured. So my commitment to my audience is that I'm going to show up as me. And the commitment I require from them is either you accept that or fuck off and go somewhere else. But guess what? There isn't anywhere else that they can trust. And that's the point of why I swear. I'm going to be me.
Yeah.
And if you know any other Australians, this is how the fuck we talk.
Yeah. That's so
and
true.
we're not going to apologize for it. Right?
Facts. 100%. Absolutely. I resonate. First of all, I really respect that you didn't stop swearing.
Thank
And
you.
not for anything, because, and the reason why is, and I've mentioned this on some of recent episodes, so just to summarize it so people don't have to hear it again. I, for a long time, would match or the Khalid you see in front of you to my guests. So are they someone that swears? I will swear. Are they someone that's more reserved? I will be more reserved. So, and a lot of times, just like us today, the first time I'm meeting you in person is when you sit down for us to record a podcast. So it takes a lot, as you know, as a host, it's going to take a lot of work on my part to make you feel comfortable, to make you do that. So I felt like I couldn't be Khalid and a good host. Those two things wouldn't work. And my closest friends, the coffee guy, he told me, he's like, the conversation is good, but it's not you. It's you, but it's a very reserved, polished version of you. And I can only say, now this is like episode 121 or something. Only now, I'd say in the last 6-7 months, do I feel like I'm me now. And the swearing thing is a part of me too.
100%.
You know, and it's not for any reason to be cool or just be whatever. It's just,
It's how you express yourself.
you know, I think, I would think the word fuck is the most beautiful word in the world.
I agree.
It's applicable to anything.
I agree.
Happy, sad, angry, sad. So I'm like, it's so, and I think it's quite efficient.
It adds depth and shade and color to anything you're trying to express.
Absolutely. So if you have someone who understands it. But I honestly, if I'm going to be very honest too, I might swear in a podcast that my guest doesn't, but I still have to measure it a little bit, because I think to build that connection, you do have to balance yourself out a little bit.
100%. And a part of the courage is owning your decision whether to swear or not.
Exactly.
We had someone from the ICO, which is like the UN of coffee. They were actually, the UN helped them establish.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
International Coffee Organization. And he came on the podcast, and before we hit record, he said, listen, wait. If you swear, I can't share this podcast with my colleagues. So I'm not telling you don't swear, but if you swear, I can't share it. Now, it goes back to that muscle, that courage muscle we're talking about, right? In that moment, I'm sitting there thinking a lot of things, but it's like, well, if I don't swear, is that me saying that I'm not being me? I don't have to swear to be me.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm not going to not swear because you need me to not swear. He wasn't asking me to not swear.
Yeah.
He did about the most respectful thing somebody could do.
Absolutely.
Is give you the options, you decide.
Absolutely.
I didn't swear. Why? I have the number one compass question we ask in everything that we do, whether it's map it forward and we're doing a podcast, or it's a client that has to go and embark on a new project. The number one compass question anyone can ask themselves is, what does success look like at the end of this? Whether it's a conversation, a meeting, or a whole project.
Yeah.
And for me, success is that as many people get to hear his perspective, which is a controversial one, as possible.
Absolutely.
But also, people in his audience get to hear my perspective. When you decide, no, I'm only going to stick to exactly what I'm doing because that's what I need to do, that's not called being a good host. It's called being a stubborn asshole.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not a stubborn asshole.
I don't think so.
Well, I'm the only one who gets to decide that. So the thing is, as a host, your job is to become the realest version of you and have something worth listening to.
That's such a beautiful way to put it, honestly. That hit home. That hit home with me because, like you said, it's not all or nothing. I can still be all of me, but I don't have to I can take out some parts just for this brief period of time. Yeah. And the example that you use to not swear in that context makes a lot of sense. Let me think of the bigger picture of this. I get his audience to hear my perspective, and I want my audience to hear his. And you want them also as a guest, also as a host, you want the guest to have a good experience. This is not supposed to be like a hatchet job. You come in and I'm going to just challenge you and shit on you and cause controversy. I think you can have a controversial conversation, but there's a way to do it. There's a way to carry it. There's a way to frame that question. And that's what you want in it, because you want the value of the content. But if you're not respecting the person and making them shine in the best light to deliver the value that you want from them,
you failed as a host.
There you go. 100%. 100%.
And it also depends on how you run your podcast. Like, that's something I've found very interesting over the years, watching people do podcasts. Some people edit, some people don't edit. Some people are trying to pull something out of a guest. Some people are looking for that gotcha moment. None of that ever works for me. It's never worked for me.
I agree.
I'm not interested in listening to podcasts where that's what people are trying to get to. This question answer bullshit doesn't work for me either.
I agree.
I'm not interested. Podcasts shouldn't be interviews. Podcasts should be about an engaging conversation that you just so happen to have the privilege of being a fly on the wall to listen to.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, Lee, honestly. And I just wanted to round off our conversation for today with, I got 3 more questions for you.
Yeah.
So and this was one I really wanted to make sure I asked you, because one of the biggest issues with coffee is, as we've discussed today, a lack of knowledge. Mm-hmm. And that means there's so many ways to get into coffee that people don't know about. Mm-hmm. Typically, you think I either have to be a roaster, I have to own a cafe, I can be a barista. Q graders are, I'd say, a rare bunch, but that's it, really. But what I learned from your website and the work you guys do at Map It Forward is you guys have courses on on so many different workshops and ways that you can get into coffee. And touching on our conversation today, if I know, let's say I don't want to go down those 4 routes that I discussed, but I love coffee and I want to get into it. If I now am aware of a new way I can get into coffee in some part of the supply chain, whatever the case might be, and if more people do that, not only are we bringing more passionate people into coffee who actually like it and have an opportunity now to do it, extrapolating that big, like longer term, that's where more conscious coffee consumption and production is going to come in. That's my thought. So I'd love to hear from you, you got the Map It Forward approach and why it's important for you guys to have created all these different like workshops and courses.
Yeah. It's a great question, because people think that the only thing you can do, as you said, in coffee is own a business, be a barista, be a roaster, all that kind of thing. Coffee is an entire supply chain with logistics, with agriculture, agronomists, farmers, all of that kind of stuff. The thing that we're lacking in the coffee industry is people who have a conscious approach to coffee as an industry. So if you're someone who wants to get into to do something in coffee, first of all, you need to love coffee.
Yeah.
I didn't get into coffee just because I loved coffee. I loved working in cafes because of the hospitality. That's the Arab in me.
Sure.
Right? We're born
Welcome. Please.
Exactly, welcome.
You want food, tea,
Ahlan wa
kak,
sahlan.
everything.
Right? So for us, hospitality is in our blood, and coffee just happened to be the conduit that. And I'm a scientist, so curiosity is something that is a part of the way that I approach the world. What we realized is that everybody's gravitating towards the thing that's going to make them famous in coffee. Because the barrier to entry is so low that people flood into these 3 or 4 things that they're told that they can do. And the only real barrier is access or money.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to open a business, anyone can open a business in coffee. As to whether you're going to be successful is determinant on how much market saturation there is and how much money do you have. But then people say, well, I don't have the money to open a business and I don't want to be a barista because I'm either too old to be a barista or it doesn't appeal to me. If you love coffee and you want to work in the industry somehow, I would say start listening to the podcast. It will familiarize you with who the different players in the industry are. You don't need to listen to the podcast because we need more people listening to the podcast. You need to listen to the podcast so that you can start to get a landscape of what it is. And then you go and engage with those people on LinkedIn and on Instagram. And if you're a finance person and you want to work in coffee, go and find a company that needs good finance people and work in that. And that's a gateway to being engaged in the coffee industry. And what we're trying to get people to understand is that there is a lot that needs to be done to strengthen coffee. But we have people that fail up in coffee.
Okay.
So you get a barista who happens to fail into a cafe manager position up.
Mm.
A barista should not be becoming a cafe manager. Someone who understands how to read profit and loss statements should be becoming a cafe manager. And that's why the industry is broken. And that's why we're trying to say to people, if you want to become a cafe manager, there's a step that needs to happen between you being a barista and you becoming a cafe manager. Identify what is actually involved in being a cafe manager. And while you're a barista, go and get the education and grow into that role. And so we have taken that approach because I got tired of the lack of professionalism while I was a barista. And I mean, granted, I came with an advantage. I came from having been in the corporate world for 10 plus years. So professionalism was ingrained into me. Whereas most people come from, they went to college or university, they needed a job while they were doing that, they started in coffee and they had no one teach them professionalism, so they don't think it's important to turn up to work on time.
Mm.
That same person is getting promoted to becoming a manager because the manager before them left. And the cafe owner can't afford to employ a real manager.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really important for someone to start speaking out about how, you were talking about how do we fix all of this? Well, it's through layered approaches.
Yeah.
The number of people who have contacted me, and this is a deep privilege for me, the people have contacted me and said, I didn't open a business because of you. I quit my job when I got an MBA, and when I'm finished, I'm coming back into the coffee industry. I decided to start going to Origin instead of taking vacations because I figured it was an important part of my education to understand what I'm doing. This is going to take time to bear fruit. But like at the beginning of the conversation where we were saying that we'll need to let the market forces take whatever role they're going to take. This is the positive part of the market forces. And the people like us, we have built by not cheating, lying, stealing, or fucking anybody over. The fruits of that labor take time to bear fruit. So, yeah.
Like you said, it's like as we've discussed throughout this whole podcast, it's a gigantic task to change something, you know, such a massive industry that is so interconnected, that plays into everything, to change the cultural mindset, the investment, like everything that's going on. But like you said, it's gonna take time. And at least in my head, I'm like, okay, everything's burned to shit anyway. It's gonna take us 7 years at least for the next, you know, for coffee to get back to that the next phase of coffee. So we do have some time now. Some time. This is the lead up time that we need to get our shit together, learn, get more people into the industry, so that when we enter phase 2 is ready to like kick off, we have the right people or better people in place to start running coffee in a new direction. I wanted to round off our conversation today, Lee, with just 2 questions. These are the questions I ask all my guests. So first of all, either looking personally or professionally, when I ask you the question, what are you most proud of for yourself? What would you say?
That I am the same in episode 1261 as I was in episode 1.
I respect that a lot. And especially with the background you've had and the career you've had in coffee, it would be very easy and very understandable if you weren't by this point. But the fact that you can say that you still are, I think that's a big pat on the shoulder.
And it wasn't me that said that. It was actually a member of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, that came to me and said, so we've been looking through your early episodes of your podcast, and, you know, we realized a couple of things about you, and one of them is that you're the same person in the first episodes as you are in these episodes. That was a very interesting conversation that I didn't expect to happen. Anyone who thinks that coffee is not political, there you go.
There you go. That's a pretty significant stamp of approval there. But. And for my last question, Lee, what is the message you'd like everyone to take home with them today?
Don't take coffee at face value. Because underneath that cup of deliciousness that's giving you a hug, either that was grown with integrity and it made its way to you with integrity, or there was slavery, sex trafficking, poverty and deceit that is in your cup. And your job as a consumer is to figure out, not on a surface level, but on a real values-based perspective, what are you drinking? Are you contributing to coffee in a positive way, or are you contributing to the destruction of a supply chain? And then take that and replicate that with bananas and with wheat and with all the commodities that you engage with, oil, petrol, all of it. And how are you participating in all of the supply chains that you are engaging in?
I don't think there's a better way or a better message to end the podcast on, given, you know, our conversation today. Lee, I wanted to say thank you so much, really, for coming on the show. On a personal level and selfishly, this has been like a masterclass in coffee for me. I've learned so much from you, not just on the coffee side, but I've also been paying attention to how you speak and how you answer questions, which is a testament to how you host shows, because this doesn't come by accident.
Thank you.
And just thank you for giving us the information for the podcast and for being a conduit for positive change in coffee, the drink that I and millions around the world love so much. So yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And I want to turn that back on you and say thank you for creating a space where people can be who they are. It's a real privilege to sit in a space where somebody is curious enough and wise enough in conversation. You know, in our culture, conversation has an etiquette.
Absolutely.
Right?
For sure.
And we learn that from our elders in how to speak and when to speak and how to approach. And it is a real art form in the Arabic culture. And you fucking nail it, bro.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate that. I'm very humbled, very grateful for those words. I do take those to heart. If anyone wants to reach out with you, connect with you, work with you, check out the podcast, what's the best place for us to get in touch?
So the podcast is called The Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward. Our website is mapitforward.coffee. And our social media is mapitforward.coffee.
Awesome.
And very responsive. Whatever you need, just get in contact. We do business advisory services, mastermind groups, consulting, and we have access to a wide variety of consultants that can help build a business on every level anywhere around the world.
Yeah. So guys, make sure to check out Map It Forward across all the channels. We'll be putting it in the show notes anyway, so people have the links and everything. Lee, just to round off, thank you so much. I really had a blast. I really appreciate it. Guys, to everyone listening, thank you so much. As always, like, share, follow, and subscribe to the podcast at Hope It Helps Pod on all channels. And as always, guys, hope it helps. Peace.
Well done.
That was fucking awesome. That was amazing.
You crushed it.
And that's another episode in the bag, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. All I'm trying to do is give back with this podcast. So if you walked away from this episode having learned something new, gained a new perspective, or you simply just enjoyed the episode, that means I've done my job. If you could please do me the small favor of hitting that subscribe button, it would really mean the world to me and would help me build the show and build the channel. And that's all I ask. Stay tuned for a lot more conversations, new topics, more exciting guests. But until then, and until next time, guys, hope it helps. Peace.